on this. So the first question I got for you is the petrodollar a real thing, and has oil priced in dollars favored the U.S.?
Well, yeah. Yeah, no, okay, so this agreement started in 1972, I believe. I don't know, one of those years.
I'm going to give you a little more juice, but you keep talking.
Yeah, and this was with Iran, and the agreement was that they were going to save in U.S. Treasury bonds, and they were going to, which was the world reserve currency, like Iran, like this is a freaking steal, right? This is okay. Well, yeah, of course we're going to buy Treasury bonds for the most powerful country in the world, and they were going to price their oil in dollars ahead of everything else, and then we would just give them military support. And it's crazy because this was not, like they didn't share this publicly, you know, this was just like their agreement. And then we've just kind of like quietly supported them in all of their shit. And everybody's just like, but this isn't real. This isn't real. Saudi Arabia is, you know, they're over there or whatnot. But we've been doing it. We've been doing it the whole fucking time. We've been supporting them in every single thing. And like people act like it's a conspiracy theory. It's like, there's fucking papers. There's memos. Like we have all of this. Like they've absolutely been doing this. And you could make, if you had all of the major oil producing countries of the world taking only Beanie Babies for oil, everybody would have to buy the shit out of Beanie Babies. You'd have trunkfuls of Beanie Babies. You could make any stupid bullshit worth money if you just forced them to buy, like everybody, who the fuck doesn't need to turn their lights on? Like it's the foundation of everything in the economy. So yeah, you can create false support for anything if you have to buy, if the only thing you can turn the lights on with is my Beanie Baby token or poverty points, whatever the fuck you want to call it.
So everything you said just makes sense to me, and I've kind of bought into it. Essentially, we went off the gold standard, and what gives currency value is the fact that there's guaranteed redeemability. That's in part why the US dollar is so valuable, is because you know you can pay your taxes in it. So at least I know that there's built-in redeemability with the United States government, and so therefore if I hold it at a minimum, it's got value that I can pay my taxes with it. Yeah. And so when we priced oil exclusively in dollars, it meant that you were guaranteed that there would be this asset that you could buy with your dollars, and so to me, that would prop up value. However, I've heard some very smart people basically say, this is not a real thing, it's not a big driver of the dollar's value. I've heard that currency is so easily redeemable that to think like you could so easily convert in and out of US dollars that you wouldn't necessarily need to hold dollars on account of the fact that you could be buying gold with it. I think I even heard Safadine say that this is not a big driver, that it hasn't been a formal agreement or a real thing. So I put it back to you in terms of like boosting US dollar demand, which I see as kind of, that's the story of the United States government. We've got one product, it's US dollars. To the extent that we can force the rest of the world to use US dollars, we can continue to steal from the rest of the world through inflation. It's favored us for the last, basically since we went off, prior to going off the gold standard, we were already stealing from other people, and the reason why we had to go off of it was because France was like, yeah, we'll take our gold. And then Nixon gave his legendary speech of how dare you try and after we stole their money.
We owe you.
Yeah,
and son of a bitch.
The fact that other people would impose on the United, it was glorious nonsense, but total nonsense. But in your opinion, you think that there has been a relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and I even remember reading that
Iran. I think I said Iran at the very beginning. It's fucking Saudi Arabia, whatever.
But the thing is that if it wasn't, why is it that the axis of evil is all the countries that sell oil for something else?
Right, and I also heard that that's why we took out Gaddafi, was because he was trying to create a market for oil for gold. So
this is why we're going after Russia.
So I hand it back to you.
Yeah.
First is, you're like, if you even had to put almost a percentage of what amount of value is made in the dollar on account of the fact, like, does that reduce the value of it by 10%? Does that potentially reduce the value of the dollar by 50%? Like, is it just part of the illusion that the dollar is valuable? And then it does kind of bring us into the BRICS situation of, have we royally fucked up with what we've done with forcing Russia out of our payment processing system trying to steal their money that's in treasuries and basically forcing people to operate in currencies other than our own. So I hand it back to you because I get very fascinated in the BRIC storyline, and I'm the quick sucker for, hey, we've overcheated and people are going to get on to the fact that we've been cheating this entire time and stealing from them and we're not going to be able to do it forever. But then I hear the experts going,
1,000% on that
the
one.
dollar's got a lot more leg room. There's so much debt in the dollar, and it's the most liquid of the markets, and the petrodollar was never a real thing. It's a conspiracy theory of the gold nuts. So I hand it back to you.
Okay, so when it comes to the petrodollar, if you're talking about like trying to come up with some explicit percentage, like everything about government is the appearance of power.
Right.
And it's just one of those things in the list that just says that we're still the most powerful. Like everything was basically in flux at the beginning of the 1970s, and it was a question of is the U.S. still the big power? You know, France came with a battleship to New York to get their gold, and we said no. And the inflation skyrocketed, and we had gas lines and all of this stuff, and it was all just because of speculators and some bullshit that they came up with. But it was an extremely chaotic moment in monetary history of is the dollar still going to be the dominant system?
Right.
And I think it was actually a genius, as much as it's just total bullshit. It was actually a pretty genius political move that says you're always going to be able to go to the Middle East and you're always going to be able to turn on the lights if you're using the dollar. And all it did was backstop the collapse. All it did was backstop and just say, we're still the biggest economy. You're going to have to get, the Middle East is going to be selling their oil for dollars. And it just became part of the kind of facade that the U.S. was the most important country, thus the U.S. currency was going to be the most desirable. And that was just one of the pieces of it's like, well, at the end of the day, you're still just going to go be able to buy oil. But today, it doesn't have, like, I don't think there's like some clear, like, oh yeah, 20%, it's just going to like vanish, like now that the deal's kind of up, it's expired. And, so in some sense, like, oh, the dollar's about to collapse. Like, no, it's intertwined into everything. All of the infrastructure. It's like saying that, you know, Facebook had some bullshit that was getting everybody to sign up for free and it was paying them all $5. And it's like, well, they're not paying anybody $5 anymore. Everybody's going to leave Facebook. It's like, no, everybody's already on fucking Facebook. You know, Facebook's already dominated and took over everything. The entire infrastructure runs on Facebook. That's what we have with the dollar. So it becomes circular. It's just, now it's just network effect. And everybody's still going to be using the shit out of it.
This was kind of Gary Richide, who's kind of the run-your-mouth historian. This was, we did an episode on the petrodollar, and he was essentially saying that at a crucial moment when the U.S. went off the dollar standard, they basically got Saudi Arabia to step in, and we created this new thing, which was the guaranteed redeemability for oil. And now a full, I guess it's what, 40 or 50 years later, something like that, since we went off the gold standard. It's, I guess what you're describing is the network effect, which maybe I'll let you explain what that means, but just the dollar has been so overwhelmingly used by everybody and so much debt is priced in dollars that there's kind of this endless demand for dollars just to service the amount of debt that's in the world.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about a fractional reserve system in fiat where literally new money is issued as debt, your demand just to pay off your loans to not go bankrupt. Like there's guaranteed demand. You know, like if I have absolutely nothing and I just issue $100,000 to you, and now you have to pay me back that $100,000, I created $100,000 of demand. I created myself a fucking salary and an interest rate, and I've just issued this, and I had fucking nothing. Now you're paying me a salary. You owe me whatever house that you bought or car that you bought, and I've just created demand for the dollar. When you look at the fucking debt, look around. We've got astronomical amounts of debt. Like we're leveraged 40 to 1 kind of like across the board. It's absolutely batshit. It makes no fucking sense. The only reason the whole thing hasn't imploded on itself is because there's just not a big enough valve for the pressure to release. There's nowhere for, what the fuck, what are you gonna put $40 trillion worth of value in? Nothing. There's nothing that can possibly accept that amount of pressure to release. And until that, it's just gonna kind of keep sucking. It's just gonna just poisonously like do this weird cycle where everything kind of gets shitty, quality degrades, we issue more debt, and we go through another fucking bubble, and everybody's mad, and it's all capitalism's fault. It's like, no, motherfucker, we're counterfeiting trillions of dollars every fucking year. Of course this is the result. Everything gets shitty. Everything gets shitty, and everything gets fucking harder.
So let's talk about this theoretical next bubble. Because, it's almost like everyone kind of agrees the path isn't sustainable. But people are like, how long does it take before this falls off? And does the U.S. have the ability to basically bubble again? And we've seen quite a bubble basically since the housing market. The housing market collapsed and they realized, and then, if you just look at how much Fed money has been put into the system since then to kind of, and where the stock market is, where everything is. And all right, this is a little bit ADD. Before we get into the bubble, though, I look at the situation with Russia, and to me, I'm not talking about the morality of the war at all. I'm just talking U.S. strategic interest. We lost in the first week of the war when China and India said we will continue to trade with Russia. We were hoping that we were going to gang up on Russia and everyone would get our back. We basically forced Europe into it. I don't think Germany was interested. We blew up the Keystone, not the Keystone pipeline. We blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And then Russia and India were like, we're going to continue to trade with them. And we lost. It literally in week one, when the two of them were not bullied into getting our back, we could have just called it a quits and said, we did not get what we were looking to get out of this. It was not the gang up. And not only have we lost since then, so
we actually showed that it's okay to just say, go fuck yourself, America, and there's nothing we can do about it.
And so now, if you look at it, you've got, firstly, North Korea and Iran are aligned with Russia in terms of that they're kind of providing arms to each other. India is buying oil from Russia. We kicked them out of our payment system. We also channeled to the rest of the world, hey, not only can you be kicked out of this payment system, we will steal your money that was in treasuries, which also just doesn't make sense. I've said it's like we were stealing from all these people by having them in our casino, and then we threw them out of the casino and tried to tell them that they couldn't go gamble somewhere else. It's like, you should have just kept them here. It's like, we were the chief boss of the mob, and everyone had to pay their tribute, and then we got pissed off at big players for them to go earn for someone else. It did not make sense. So now you've got the big talk of BRICS, and you get, I hear big financial minds basically just saying these other countries cannot work together, they don't trust each other, the dollar's king shit, and for now, everybody's stuck with the Fed. So I'm curious, because I guess you and I both, there's some people out there that just say the petrodollar is bullshit. So what's your takeaway of kind of BRICS and what we've done with Russia in terms of throwing them out of our financial system? Do you think that these other countries are going to figure out how to work together on alternative financial systems that we're actually going to see a movement away from the US dollar, or everyone's so stuck right now we're still kind of safe?
There's an interesting dynamic when you have the world reserve currency is you get this exorbitant political privilege of being able to essentially consume as much as you want because your dominant export is just ink on paper or cotton. And you're just exporting your currency. But what you do is you price yourself out of kind of the foundational manufacturing of a country. So all of your manufacturing gets pushed overseas, everything. Think about how fucking retarded it is to think that it's somehow cheaper for us to get our supplies, ship it to China, put the shit together, put it back on a ship and ship it back to us, and somehow that's cheaper. That makes no fucking sense. The reason it's actually economically viable is because of the difference between the currencies. It's because everybody overseas needs our currency desperately. So they will pay massive premiums in order to get the currency for the stuff. And what ends up happening is that we can't produce anything. Everybody forgets how to use a fucking hammer. And we grow up as these kind of soy boy bullshit, and nobody knows how to do anything anymore. And the manufacturing gets gutted, and we just import plastic shit from all of these other countries. And we've gutted the kind of core of the country for the benefit of just being able to consume as much as we want and never actually paying real prices for stuff. And we mostly just print money.
And so just because I don't fully understand, so what's at the core of it? That people just want dollars, so they're always converting their currency into dollars?
Yes, there's always a lien in the essentially the price difference, there's always a lean toward the world reserve currency, the spread, yeah.
Right.
So the network effect is just so massive with the world reserve currency. If it was an independent currency, it'd actually be a very different story. But because it's a single country that can spread out, like, if Venezuela prints, a billion pesos, or what's the Venezuelan bolivar, prints a billion bolivar, only Venezuela has to suck up all of that fucking value. So all their prices double.
Right.
If the US prints $1 trillion, the whole world might just suck up 1.3 trillion.
Right.
There'd be nobody will even know that it happened. So we really just screw up the dynamic, and you can't price between countries and the world reserve currency country accurately. So you end up subsidizing manufacturing everywhere else in the world and gutting it from the country that prints the currency.
I guess I don't quite get, I'm missing the leap from the network effect of us spreading out our inflation to how does that subsidize their factories? I don't get that.
Okay, so because everything that they do is cheaper because our currency is more valuable than theirs.
Right.
So they are willing to sell at sub-market prices, and our currency we just print it. So it's extremely easy we just end up having a high, like they have to print a debt, they have to pay a debt. And when that debt ends up being denominated in dollars, they just need us to print money. That's actually one of the crazy things, is that as a world reserve currency, it's something that they've kind of seen throughout history, is that if it ends up being a single country that has the world reserve currency, but it's their national currency, is that they actually must go into a deficit. Because if they don't go into a deficit, literally all of the other countries collapse. Like economies actually have aggressive, like if our economy collapses by like 2%, you can expect tons of other countries to collapse by 10%, by 20%, because they are dependent on outflows of currency for us to pay their debts and to actually fulfill their contracts. So if we aren't flowing money out, they actually have an exaggerated effect. So they have no economic sovereignty whatsoever. If we have a recession, good luck. They're all screwed twice as much as we are. So they're willing to they're always willing to underpay what we want in the country, because they need the currency for the financial networks, to pay off the loans, to pay off the bonds. And this has basically been the case until about 10, 13, 14 years ago,
right,
when everybody just kind of stopped buying U.S. bonds. Like, nobody fucking buys that shit anymore.
Wouldn't that kind of be exacerbated by the fact that we have like 750 military bases overseas? Like,
yeah, for sure.
Biggest, like,
yeah.
Realistically, in terms
yeah.
of material.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The perceived power, and then the fact that we have institutions and people in so many other countries, like it compounds on itself, because then that makes it easier for us to go there and do business with them, which means that we're going to own some building in the area. Like it's a feedback
There's
loop.
always going to be more bolivars chasing dollars than there are dollars.
Right. So
Yeah,
just,
exactly. That's a great way, simple way to put it.
Just
yeah.
so I can kind of wrap my head around this. So it kind of sounds like the banking scheme, when it comes to a bank, is going to lend a bunch of money to people that they don't have for homes, and now everyone's got to pay basically the bank forever for homes. They live in the homes, but they got to pay real dollars into the bank, and the bank was just able to artificially create that money. So like
Never
everyone,
own the homes, but they're all paid back to the bank.
And everyone owes that money to the bank. So essentially, the U.S. government, it's not that there's high demand for our debt. It's not that. It's that we've lent money that we've just printed to other people, but they got to pay that back to us.
Yeah.
And so in paying that back to us, they actually need dollars, and so they have no choice but to basically sell us things. Even I'm not using this term correctly, but almost at a loss, or at like they have to force slave wages upon their own population because they need to come up with the money that they owe us.
Would you rather
which
cut
we just
profits
printed
massively or go out of business?
Right. So they're cutting their own profits because they owe us what we've indebted to them.
Yes.
And what we indebted to them was free to us because it was just money that we printed.
Yes.
And we've got a military to be like, well, you're not fucking defaulting on that.
Yes.
And so the scheme now is more just how
And
much.
even worse
right,
is we can loan them more at higher,
right.
a larger percentage at a higher rate, because again, our cost isn't specific to that country. It's not the inflation just between us and them. We still get to spread it out over.
Right.
There's a great piece by Alex Gladstein called "Structural Adjustment," and they tally essentially what the IMF has done in lending out to African and South American countries, just essentially developing world. And they just tallied over it's not a charity scheme or something where they're investing in these countries. It's net outflows. Every single year we're just sucking resources out of them. The total since 1970 is $64 trillion worth of stuff that we have sucked out of these countries by loaning them to help. You don't help somebody by giving them a fucking loan that you print out of nowhere. That's a gift to yourself. If I just invent $100,000 out of thin air and loan it to him, he's like, thank God I finally have a car.
No, 'cause
he
now
does
that-
it to me. He bought
right.
me a fucking
Right,
car.
so
car plus interest.
To explain that, I basically just indebted you to go create $100,000
shit.
that didn't exist. Yeah,
Exactly,
because I got to
exactly.
just print it. I didn't have to actually work for it. So
And they
I
call this
hand,
charity.
And so I hand you the money, and now you've got to go work your ass off to pay that back to me. But I didn't have to actually manufacture anything for the money.
You didn't have to own. You didn't have to loan
Yeah.
savings that somebody else is putting at risk. It was issued into thin air.
Yeah,
Issued from thin air.
I mean, it's a pretty good scheme. So going back to the BRICS, are people actually making a movement away from it that is going to work in any capacity, or how does this actually break?
So
How does the U.S. military factor into the strength of the U.S. dollar? Because I feel like that's our main thing. It used to be the gold standard, yes, and then there's the petrodollar, and this Saudi Arabia just said that they aren't going to use U.S. dollar.
yeah.
It's a high-level drunken conversation we're having.
Let's get really into the details. So he's asking about the U.S. military for anybody who doesn't hear him.
I was gonna say you could see it like the way that Trump talks about it, where he's like, well, the EU's not paying their fair share, like we're paying less for their military. Well, we're subsidizing their military with that, so they have to kind of pay us implicitly.
Okay, so just to solidify it to one question, I guess what we're asking is, does the BRICS movement actually challenge us in a way that there could be a movement from the U.S. dollar, and is the strength of the U.S. military so strong that it's so overimposing on these other countries that I guess everyone's just kind of stuck with the dollar for now?
I would say probably three main points that stick out in my head when you're asking that. One is I don't think I wonder if the BRICS nations would be able to actually develop a currency, or if they even want to develop their own currency, or if they would just kind of go back to gold or
Right.
something easy. Whereas China has actually been very explicit about it. It's actually kind of crazy how much China seems to understand the problems of this system, which is why they have the renminbi and they have the yuan, is they have a local currency and they have an international currency. And they don't want to be the world reserve currency because they know the problems of it. That's why they separate them. But the other crazy thing about the BRICS nations is that they're actually a larger economic bloc. They're more of the economic power of the world. They are more of the world economy than NATO and the West now.
I mean, in terms of the actual goods being provided to the world.
Just
Right.
straight GDP. They're bigger now. So whatever decision they make is going to be very interesting and it's going to be very consequential. But then the last thing on the U.S. military is I actually increasingly think the U.S. military is our liability because we can't afford our debt anymore. And it costs us 10 times as much to make a ship as it does China. China's pumping out ships like fucking crazy. They're manufacturing stuff. They will surpass us just looking
I gotta
at trend
say,
lines.
the whole idea of militaries and ships and this, isn't it just stupid when we're talking about people with nukes? It's like, what does it fucking matter? So you got 75 ships, and I
That's
got
a good point. It's all just kind of fucking show,
and
right?
I got 300. It's
all
like
PR.
if you're gonna have some sort of you might as well create a digital program where we can conduct. Like if you're gonna have rules for war that include that we're not gonna nuke each other, why even bother building the fucking ships? You can just go, I don't know, do rocks, paper, scissors, shoot. It doesn't actually matter. You know, so like I don't.
That's about right.
I don't really understand the concept
That's
of
a
like
sufficiently logical assessment.
the strength of anyone's military, where it's like if we're gonna actually fight, it's just we're both.
You just gotta do just fuck this game.
Yeah, we're both just dead.
It all comes back to the illusion of power, though, right?
Right.
Yes. Yeah. It's about the perception of power, who gets to tell who what to do, and who can actually say, go fuck yourself and get away with it.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
So I got two more questions that I really want to get to, and we are a little bit. I mean, you and I could do forever. But this one, I was reading Safadin's second book, the Fiat Standard, and I have a question for you. There's something that I don't quite that I guess in terms of the story for Bitcoin and why you would be long Bitcoin or buy into Bitcoin or your love for Bitcoin. I was reading in his book where he started, it seems like his best case scenario for Bitcoin is not so much that we're transacting in it as much as it becomes a base layer currency. And when I understand kind of the way at least human psychology seems to operate now, people really like free and easy. And so Bitcoin, as we mine more of it, will become more expensive to actually transact in, which I understand does, that's inherently what creates the value for it, is that it becomes more expensive. But in terms of like human usage, I mean, the fact that it's currently very volatile, I don't think makes it the most attractive sort of value for everybody. I understand that when I bought it, it's up way over, the long term, I understand all that. But the fact that it becomes increasingly more expensive to transact in a world where people are very into things, people give up a lot. We all give up a lot of our data on the basis that this app is free, that Facebook's free, that Google's free. Think about how much we're not that smart and forward looking in terms of the products and services we use, and that people seem to favor free over what's smart and better for them. And just to go one step further, once there's already kind of Bitcoin becoming more expensive, then I don't quite understand how it beats gold, because I understand that gold might be expensive to ship, but if transacting in Bitcoin is also increasingly more expensive, I mean, is it that much cheaper than me having to ship a gold bar or whatever mechanisms could be between banks in terms of moving? And just for one more question, fine. So how do I trust a bank in terms of it moving its gold bars around? Fine. But if Bitcoin's a base layer currency as well, then at some point we're going to end up with some sort of a pyramiding scheme on top of that. So I don't understand why Bitcoin wins against gold in a world where the transaction fees get more expensive.
Okay, so two reasons. One, the critical factor you're missing is Bitcoin is a protocol, like it's software.
Right.
So you can script it to do all sorts of things. In fact, just I guess within the last year, they figured out that you can actually trick it with just kind of like empty if-and scripts in order to create essentially a virtual hardware on it. So you can essentially run any code at all that you can run, that you could run in a piece of hardware that you could build into a circuit. You can actually put into a Bitcoin script and have it be the ultimate decider as to who owns what in Bitcoin, which means that there is virtually no limit, because there's no cap on human ingenuity. There's virtually nothing that you can't do with Bitcoin. It is an open software protocol. Now, the reason it doesn't go back to gold is because in a digital environment, gold doesn't sound money anymore, because all you can ever do is trade an IOU. That's it. There's no way to physically send gold over the internet. So this is the reason gold got captured, is because it scales in the reverse. The bigger it gets, the harder it is to fucking actually settle it. This is why France sent a literal battleship to New York to get their gold from the US, is because you have to send a battleship to get $1 billion in gold. There's just no other alternative. So the bigger it is, the harder it is to actually move. If you're trying to move $1 billion in Bitcoin, it's fucking easy and cheap. It's so cheap. It's the easiest possible thing. So the bigger in value that you get in Bitcoin, the more obvious and clear the settlement is, which means that one person with $100 billion, if we're on a Bitcoin standard in JP Morgan, there's a bit of a hint that JP Morgan is leveraged 40 to 1, which they are, which you cannot actually exit in fiat. If we were on a Bitcoin standard and there was a hint that JP Morgan was insolvent, one person with $100 billion could execute that withdrawal, and in seconds, that whole fucking company is gone. There's something that's been propped up for decades and decades by the US government and then issued money and loans and everything. That shit is fucking done on a Bitcoin standard because you can move that amount of money anywhere in the world in an instant. And that is...
You mean just because you can retrieve it from them and put it into your own wallet?
Because you can say, no, it's behind my keys, you don't have it, your fucking company's got jack shit because you just committed fraud.
Right.
But we have a systemic fraud system that can just fraudulently fake a whole bunch of fucking points and pretend like none of this is a big deal. If you're on a Bitcoin standard, you can't play that game. We know what fractional reserve looks like in Bitcoin standards. It's called Mt. Gox. It's called FTX. We've seen it implode 100 fucking times already. One of the big things I think in the next couple of cycles, actually probably the next cycle, I think we're in the middle of this, in the next cycle, is that a serious, too big to fail fiat bank is going to have their ass handed to them because of Bitcoin. We're going to see a Citibank, we're going to see a Deutsche Bank, we're going to see them implode because they tried to play the fiat game in the Bitcoin world and they thought that, oh, well, we'll just make a bunch of loans. But they can't fucking withdraw that Bitcoin. They can't do it. And that is what's going to eat them alive, is if they don't change their behavior, if they think they're going to play the same game in Bitcoin land, it's not going to work. And at the end of the day, everybody's going to use the money that's actually valuable, that you actually want. The whole point of money is to be harder to create money than it is to create everything else. Why? So that you're actually incentivized to make all the stuff. Like money is just a record-keeping system. It's just keeping track of who made what so that we can pay them back. Like if I make 100,000 sandwiches and I make $1 on every one, then society, if I have $100,000, I can't eat the money, I can't live in it, I don't make a house out of it. It's my record that says that I did something for everybody else so that I can actually get it back from society. It's society's promise that I won't get fucked out of all my sandwiches. The fiat system is literally just a system of, oh, well, here's a group of people who can just fuck everybody. We can just invent as many tokens as we want. Bitcoin is simply a record-keeping system that can't be corrupted. Nobody can counterfeit. And
we're going to have shared UTXOs.
Yeah. There'll be again a million different ways from the context of a protocol. Just like there's not enough IP addresses for all the devices, but we don't have a problem getting out our phone and connecting to the internet, right? We have networks on top of networks on top of networks on top of networks. And that's how every monetary system and every networking system has ever evolved. It's in order, tons of layers on top of layers.
All right, so I'm going to hit you with this last question. I was working on a joke today about strip malls and basically all these companies that we interface with and basically how bad their service is. And I kind of have a theory for why it's like this, but I haven't actually done my homework. But I'm just assuming that the reason why I go into every single town and there's a hotel park that has the 4 hotels that are all, it's a Hilton Garden Inn, it's a Fairfield this, it's a Holiday Inn Express, and they all basically suck and are overpriced and they're cookie cutters of the same shitty hotel in every town. And so my guess is what happens is,
I've stayed there.
At a basic Federal Reserve type level, you get some guy who's got access to capital that you and I don't, and so they can get these giant, like bonds or whatever put together that as opposed to some guy just trying to get the capital to build his one hotel, you get this one guy who basically gets $45 billion from BlackRock to go build hotels across the entire country that's going to pay out, the fee to them. And so all of the money just gets basically poured into like these single individual groups. And so that's why you end up, and then by the way, it's like the stores don't even have to do that well. Because you just have the fucking. It's
No,
like
you got the network. Right?
it's like that's why every single you see an LA Fitness that's next to a Marshalls that's next to it's because some group has access to some amount of capital that they can do that 100 times across the entire country, even though none of the services businesses are that great or that grand. It's just because they have access to capital that the rest of us don't, which also allows them to duplicate these mistakes. My friend Menuhin kind of had this joke where he's like, it's like some guy who's just doing copy and paste on a bad design, where it's something that it doesn't work.
Make a new logo and a new name.
Yeah, but like it's that, but for a shitty store that's now across the entire country and is actually the only store that you can go to. So I don't really have the specifics on that down, but it seems to me like it's just another lane of the federal money scheme that every single hotel in every single town is one of these 5 places that sucks. And the reason why the only place that you can shop is a strip mall. And they all, like I was saying, they've got these stop signs and circle things for no reason. It's because one guy created this design, he had access to capital, and so he built 100 of them across the entire United States of America. And so we're stuck in these fucking traffic jams at strip malls because some asshole likes stop signs. And he had access to the Fed money. Am I totally off here, or is that basically what we're like? Is that the nightmare that we're living?
No, that's the nightmare we're living. Like, you think about it, the interesting thing, there's like a whole bunch of secondary and tertiary consequences of when you fuck up the money. Because like one of the things is like they'll give you this bullshit line that like hoarding money is bad for the economy and you should be forced to invest it. And it's like, savings is an investment in yourself and your family. Savings is literally an investment in the people of the fucking country. And they're saying that we should rob the people and make their savings not do its one job anymore. Like, you already took a huge risk to come up with some sort of a skill and be useful and valuable to society. And then you got your money for the shit that you already gave to everybody else. Going back, like the 100,000 sandwiches example, I already fed 100,000 people and I got my tokens that I'm going to be able to get that value back out of everybody else. And now you're going to steal it from me and I have to be a fucking professional investor to make sure that it actually stays where it is. And what happens? I gave it to a bunch of fucking rent seekers at the New York Stock Exchange. I give it a bunch of financiers who just leverage it up 10 to 1. And then suddenly the stock market becomes this giant, bloated, corrupt disaster that's just a giant casino. It's like, well, no fucking, of course it did. We just gave them 20 times as much money as they ever should have had to begin with. And the reason is because we were being robbed. And so we gave it to a bunch of corporations. And a bunch of corporations that we give 10 times as much money as suddenly they can play with all of our retirements rather than money that actually makes sense to put into Google. Now they have 20 times as much capital because we just gave all our money to BlackRock, and BlackRock just bought Google, and BlackRock in the fine print says that we get all of your voting rights. So now we just control Google with your retirement. And Google suddenly has 20 times the capital. Google doesn't have 20 times the good ideas. They have the same stupid fucking ideas plus the 2 good ideas that they actually had. But what happens when you have too much capital? You just go buy up all the small guys. Like, I watched it happen when we were growing up. You used to have like Tom's Cable and Bill's Internet, like all over the place. And then it was just all Spectrum. Why? Because they invested like $700 billion into fixing the internet for everybody. And what happens? They just give it to a bunch of giant corporations and they go around and buy everything up.
All right, I only got 10 minutes to take down our gear. We're gonna have to round 2 this from the studios because I do have more questions for you. Everybody, Guy Swan, there you go. You can load him up with Long Island iced teas. He still knows more than any of us. Thank you so much for hanging out on Porch Store. I got to pack up some gear. Thanks, guys.